All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the VR Chat Show. Today, we're going to be talking about Until You Fall from Schell Games. Joining us is, of course, the project director, Dave Bennett. Thanks for joining us today, man.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And of course, I'd like to introduce some of the members of the audience. We've got some YouTubers, Justin from Just Incredible VR, Betty from CreeperBettyPSVR, Chris from Shugghead Gaming, Will from ThatGuyIsWill VR, and Jason, our producer, the Livonator. We've also got these members that helped create this incredible looking room, and they are Velp, the editor and head of animations, Noctauto, the artist, Betty, another artist, Justin, Mystery, and Jason. I'd also like to give a big thank you to KylePSVR, Void Citizen, and AFewGoodTacos. Now, first off, let's get to know you a little better, Dave. Your history with the eclectic work, as you described in your bio, your work with Schell Games, and last but not least, your seriousness level about jokes.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, I mean, I've been at the Schell Games now for about, 8 years. And in that time, I've gone from programmer to designer to now senior game designer at the studio. And during that, I've worked on projects ranging from children's educational games, like to better teach you STEM topics, basically VR attractions that I can't talk about due to NDA, as well as just like fun kind of not quite tablet games, but also like Ryan Trail is probably one of my favorites. Is we actually ran a Kickstarter for that based off of a prototype that I helped build during one of our company's jam weeks. So it's kind of like a game jam that we run every year. And that was a kind of choose your own space adventure comedy game. And so kind of to lean into your question about jokes, it's very important. Humor is very serious, and it's very important to take humor seriously. So also, yeah, bad puns are a very important part of my daily life. And yeah, I guess more recently, most recently, obviously, is Until You Fall. And yeah, we've just been working on a variety of different stuff. Like the studio is known for its weird and wild different projects.
I was going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but Schell does more than just VR games. They do a whole bunch of projects, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like it ranges from again, like I mentioned, like educational stuff. We do educational grants. We made physical toys, Happy Atoms, which is like actual toys you take a photo with your phone or tablet, and that kind of helps teach kids chemistry. We do location-based entertainment, theme park stuff. I think one of the ones I worked on was actually a museum exhibit where kids get to pretend to be super spies and run around the museum, like looking for secret, basically hidden information. So like hidden in plain sight stuff that unless you are part of the secret society or secret organization, you wouldn't know to look for it. And so, yeah, like we lean on all that weird experience to basically just kind of pull into what we work on next. So I think that's like, it's definitely really challenging sometimes, but it's probably one of our best strengths.
This is awesome. Yeah, as a big fan of technology, I can certainly appreciate these things. So Schell Games was actually previously known for the comedic escape room I Expect You to Die, which garnered really a lot of attention and praise in the VR community. How big was the team then, and how big is the team now?
Oh, man. Let's see. So the studio now is probably 140 people, I think, which is massive. The team that was on I Expect You to Die ranged from, back when for the early prototype was, I think, like 5 to 10 people, and then at its biggest was probably closer to 20 to 30. Again, because we're working on so many projects simultaneously, people tend to roll on and off pretty frequently, and it's kind of the same for Until You Fall as well. Like, so yeah, the studio's just gotten bigger and bigger, so we've taken on a lot of bigger and weirder projects, but individual teams will always vary. So like and it will vary based on what the product is or what the goal is for that project, as well as just like over time it changes kind of based off of staffing needs.
May I ask, like, how many people worked on Until You Fall?
Oh man, I think at our biggest it was probably like almost 40. Like 40 people have at least had their hands on this. And yeah, like we've started again probably about the same, like 5-10 people, like a core team building the prototypes, kind of building the core concept, and then as we kind of fleshed out what the actual goal for the game would be or what the product would be, we would expand from there and then continue to staff up and down.
Yeah, for 40, I mean, 40 people for a VR game is typically pretty big these days compared to what we see a lot of the times. Um, can you give us, so let's kick things off a bit with Until You Fall. Can you tell us like a little breakdown, a little elevator pitch about what Until You Fall is?
Sure. So Until You Fall is our hack and slash roguelite VR, basically dungeon crawler, for lack of a better term. And the idea is that, you will enter the dungeon, fight enemies until you die in combat, and then you will get stronger by both the knowledge you've gained as well as your progress being converted into currency. And so there are upgrades you get in the run that are temporary, but then there are upgrades that you get out of the run where you can buy new weapons, upgrade them permanently, and again, you gain knowledge and get better at fighting these opponents as you go on. And kind of the main mechanic of the game is a kind of choreographed combat system where we show you basically where the attacks are coming from, and you either line up your weapons to block them, or you need to basically, there's like critical strike indicators that show you the direction you need to slash to do permanent health damage to them. And so that mixed with movement and other just kind of fun abilities that we call supers, like you really get to kind of mix and match weapons and powers to really build your own playstyle.
Excellent. Well, that question was more for the audience, maybe people not familiar with the game, but we've pretty much all played it, and we can say it is an absolute blast, man. And we're just having so much fun with it. So I'd like to move some questions from the audience here. First up, we've got Chris from Shugghead Gaming. Chris, go ahead, take it away.
Thanks, AJ. Dave, thanks so much for joining us. It's awesome to have you here. Thoroughly enjoyed Until You Fall. I played it on Quest, PC, and PSVR. Bought it on all three, so I definitely enjoyed the game. My question to you is, roguelites seem to be very popular right now. I've been playing a lot of them in VR and also on some of the indies on the Switch and such. And I was just wondering, was Until You Fall always kind of, I guess, developed to be a roguelite?
I mean, early on, like when we started prototyping it, before Until You Fall was Until You Fall, like we had the combat system basically. And so it was a question of like, okay, is this a big epic fantasy dungeon crawler thing where like, I think a lot of the team has affinity for games like Dark Souls or like big open world games like that. And it was a question like, okay, well, we could do that, but do we have the team and the time and the actual budget to make something like that? Well, okay, maybe. And as we continued prototyping and adding new features into the game, it actually started taking away from the combat, which was working. And so eventually we got to a point where it's like, oh, okay, well, if we want to make sure that the combat really sings and is the focus of the game, like what kind of game do we need to make? I was like, all right, well, small focused arenas. All right, that sounds good. And then what kind of like meta structure fits that? And what kind of structure is something that we can easily expand on? Because I think that was one of the goals for the project earlier on, in addition to like making a good melee combat game in VR. It was also a game that like kind of compared to I Expect You to Die, which is fun to work on, but each level is handcrafted and very expensive. And so it was almost like, okay, well, how do we make a game that actually can be expanded almost infinitely? And so like once we have the base, how can we just have something that can grow over time? And so the roguelite structure actually seemed to fit that perfectly. And at first we were talking more just about a straight rogue game, but I definitely pushed for something where basically I love roguelites because you get both the like, oh man, I lost something in the run, but I'm still getting better and getting something over time. And so you still get that sense of power growth and like kind of progression that you would lose if it was just a more pure rogue game. So short version of the answer, I guess, is not at first, but I think once we made the decision, we just went all in on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's your answer is pretty much what I kind of expected. I always felt that roguelites could be a good fit for smaller teams just because there is that ability to reuse resources. But that being said, I think anyone who's played a bunch of roguelites can profess to experiencing is that it's a balancing act with a roguelite to make it feel not grindy and not dumbed down and still like it's that game loop. And you guys nailed that feeling of I died, but I'm not like, oh, I can't do this again. It's like again. So you guys nailed that. So thank you for answering my question. That's what I thought you were going to say.
It's a great question, Chuck. Thanks, man. I mean, I can definitely attest to that where, you die and you get frustrated that you die, but then you die and then you have these new abilities, new weapons, points to spend, and you're like instantly just want to jump back in. Speaking of roguelites, were there any actual like direct influences from other roguelites that happened to influence this game?
I mean, we definitely looked at a bunch of different games, like both in there were a couple like there are not many VR rogue games or roguelike games or even roguelite games. But we definitely looked at stuff like some of the early stuff was Rogue Legacy. I think was like kind of the granddaddy of roguelite games, since like you had the actual permanent progression there. Everspace was one. Basically, we were looking at other like across genres of like, okay, well, what kind of permanent progression feels good, and what sort of basically at what cadence does it feel right to be gaining these upgrades, and in what ways should you be getting more powerful? Because again, it was a balancing act of like figuring out, okay, well, this is a skill-based game where you are getting physically better at blocking these weapons and enemy attacks, but we still want you to feel that power progression and that power growth. And so I'm sure there are plenty others we looked at. I'm trying to think. Binding of Isaac. Oh, I can't believe I forgot this. The Slay the Spire was a big one, obviously. Like that's less of a rogue light. I think the permanent progression there is more like the cards you unlock, but like we definitely looked at all the different ways that you could be gaining in power over time.
Well, mechanically, it has some similarities, but I think as a whole, the game is pretty unique, which makes it pretty special. So it's definitely some good stuff. Well, I'd like to kick things over to Betty from CreeperBettyPSVR.
Hey, Dave. Thank you, AJ. Absolute pleasure to be here today. So my question is, there are 4 different difficulty levels, everything from relaxed to nightmare mode. Can you tell us a little bit of difference between them, and what are your team's favorite modes to play in?
Boy, let's see. All right, so in the game, we have the 4 modes. You only start with 3 of them. So it's relaxed, challenging, and relentless. The idea is that each mode basically affects like how punishing the enemies are. So if we kind of default you to challenging, and enemies are unforgiving, they're fast, like you will die a lot, and that is the expectation. And relaxed, well, it tones things down a little bit, is still very difficult. Like the name does not actually imply that the game will just be a cakewalk. But what we try to do with the different difficulty levels is like, well, okay, we have a lot of knobs to tweak. Like, okay, well, enemies might have more or less health. Attack speeds are different. They're more wider or more narrow windows for you to block attacks. Another thing that's kind of like the biggest difference is enemies will basically take more or less time to exchange tickets. So like, okay, if I'm fighting 2 enemies at once and I kind of break this guy's guard, if I'm playing on a lower difficulty, this guy will kind of wait more patiently before jumping in to attack me. Whereas on the higher difficulties, enemies will just gang up on me and not be nice. And so that can make the game feel very overwhelming. And so we wanted to make sure that players had options to like, okay, well, if you want to practice, or if you just want to like enjoy the physical activity of swinging swords without having to be constantly wrecked in the first room, we wanted to give you those kind of different options and kind of incentivize players that want to play on the higher difficulties. We do add kind of like a currency boost. So like the higher difficulties give you a little extra money, but not too much. So you don't have to play it. And then once you beat the game on any difficulty, you unlock Nightmare, which is, again, a literal nightmare. And the idea is that this is a mode for gluttons of punishment and people that tend to have upgraded their weapons all the way. And it's a huge challenge. Although, again, watching people play the game now for a while, like they make it look like a cakewalk, and it is not. Like, I think one of our community members during the VR esports tournament recently cleared the game on Nightmare in like under 10 minutes, and it was just like, oh my god. So yeah,
He's a ninja.
exactly.
Ninja.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's the funny thing about this game. I mean, you can technically clear it really fast, but good luck doing that on your first try. I mean, you're going to spend hours and hours and hours kind of learning the attacks, leveling up and stuff before you can be able to do anything remotely close to that. Next, thank you, Betty. Next, we're going to kick things over to Jason.
Yes, going on to the options there. Thank you for added the seated player option. For me, I always have to play sitting down, and even when I was playing your game, I still felt fully immersed in there. Like to me, it was like I was sitting here, but I wasn't. I was standing in your game. I was going through there. I was moving forward. Plus, I got limited upper mobility issues, and you made it though I can do light strikes, even if I'm not doing the hard strikes, and still play the game. I can go through on an easier mode. Thank you for doing that. Not a lot of people
Absolutely.
take guys like us into consideration, and you definitely did, and I love you for it. So,
Was that something that the team actually considered, like, with the relaxed difficulty, with the ability to play seated as well, just to have more accessibility?
Yeah, we tried to make it as accessible as possible. I think a big goal of the studio, especially in VR, is like this should be for everyone. And for a game like Until You Fall, which is like we wanted with the goal of the game was you are a badass sword god, and you need to feel like a badass and just destroy your enemies. And you need to feel like that. Like the player needs to embody that emotion. And so, because we want to make sure everyone and anyone can feel that way, people can't get sick. So like motion sickness was a huge thing for us to make sure that we when you're playing this game, you don't throw up because you can't feel badass if you're vomiting. And we wanted to add both the standing and seated modes because we knew that like some players would not be able to play standing. And so I think in addition to that, like a lot as well as like all the accessibility options we kind of added during early access, like we added stuff to turn off screen flashes for photosensitive players, and really, again, like I know my personal goal was just making this game playable for as many people as possible because I think VR. Oh, I muted myself by holding my mouth. But I think the most important thing is making sure that, again, anyone can play this game and feel awesome. Because again, I think back when the world was not crazy and we had conferences, some of my favorite moments of showing the game off was basically people first time to VR coming into this game, be like, "Oh my god, what is this?" Okay, and then they kind of stand there very rigid, and they're very scared at first, but then slowly they're like, "Oh wait, no, I have a body and I have hands," and then as soon as they manifest their swords for the first time, they become awesome. And so seeing this, like, I don't know, 40-year-old mom just wasting these husks is just, I don't know, a delight every time. And so I think, again, a big part of that is making sure from the start, players feel like they can approach the game and play it, whether it's with the accessibility options or difficulty.
So for those of us who are kind of freaks of nature that are fortunate enough to never get motion sick, you think there's any possibility in the future that there would be a smooth turning option?
We're definitely looking into it. I think it's one of those things where, again, so much of the focus has been getting the game on the new platforms where it's like, okay, well, let's batten down the hatches and make sure this is good to go. And then once we're there, we're going to continue listening to feedback and go from there. So yes, it is. You're not the only one that was asked.
Cool. I mean, I'll be honest with you, like the click turning doesn't really bother me in this game, but but then you have smooth turning and it's just like for us that don't get sick, it's always like a must,
Sure.
Yeah, definitely a bonus. But the full locomotion is, that's a big deal for us too. That's a big deal for a lot of VR games. Next, can we move things over to ThatGuyIsWill VR? What you got, man?
Yeah, first I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan of Schell Games, and I Expect You to Die and Until You Fall. There's few games that I return to after finishing a review, but after playing Until You Fall, I can't stop going back and upgrading my weapons and trying the harder modes and all that. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. But as for the question, the first thing I noticed when I entered Rockcar was how incredibly detailed the player's body and weapons looked, which soon became apparent in the enemies as well. So who are the masterminds behind the fantastic art design?
Oh man, let's see. So the art, we have a whole slew of artists that I'm going to totally forget a couple. But in terms of the art direction, it was kind of done by Justin DeVore, and is all done internal. And so we had a team of like really talented 3D artists. Chris Cleve was our character artist. Ross Kimball, along with a variety of other folks, worked on the environment. And our VFX artists, especially like Kwame Bob, Dan Lin, Evan Brown, like they all worked on either the 2D elements or the VFX. And so we had a super a goal for the art team, especially for at the studio. Like it wasn't a real goal, but it was kind of like a secret goal, was to like, hey, we want to show the world that we can make something awesome looking. And all poured their hearts and soul into this weird beyond world. And yeah, I mean, the fact that everyone's kind of like the fact that everyone comments on the art is just excellent because I don't know, it's just such a unique take on like a weird fantasy set that I'm really happy with how it turned out. And again, like Justin and everyone else really just knocked it out of the park.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
That's awesome.
Beautiful world.
Thanks, Will. I could not agree more, man. The art design of this game, the character models and everything, you know, some of them look like they're kind of like half like tree creatures. And you know, especially the boss fights and stuff, they look absolutely incredible. That big demon boss reminds you of like Devil May Cry all the time, like some of the bosses I've seen in there. And the first thing I noticed when I jumped in the game, when I did my like first impressions live stream, was like I sat there and just looked at my body, and I can absolutely say 100% that this is like the best IK and best design for my own body. I mean, to really like feel like you've transformed into this like fantasy style like warrior is just incredible, man. So yeah, big props to Justin and the whole art design team, because it is some of the best we've seen.
Indeed.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I'm sure they really they're really thrilled to hear that.
Absolutely. So I got to ask, what are the teams? There's a lot of different weapons in this game, a lot of different combinations, abilities. And I just got to ask, what are the team's favorite weapons and combinations to use?
Well, I'll start with mine because I know mine. The basically Heart Splitter and the Night-Blooded Crest. So basically, it's the big dumb heavy axe with the offhand that makes your main hand weapon that much stronger. Because basically, it's the kind of high risk, high reward play style of just like, yeah, I'm just gonna mulch everyone, and it's gonna be a lot harder to block enemies with this weapon. But if I can pull it off, like I will just shred these enemies.
I like your
a
style.
lot of other. Yeah, no, it's just total barbarian style. We have a couple folks. I think Justin. Speaking of Justin, he really likes the guitars and kind of like a dagger play style. So he wants to kind of lean into that rogue fantasy of like, yep, I'm just shivving you like 100 times and taking you down with 1,000 cuts. Patrick, our lead designer, I think is a big fan of Spurn and a lot of the different supers that you can use, because kind of the tactical side of using those abilities to kind of control the battlefield. And so like we tried to come up with the 4 kind of like different play styles, or at least identify play styles that different folks identified with, and tried to support each of those with the weapons in the game. So I mean, I think but my favorite part too is that like throughout development, there was just constant arguments about what the worst weapon was or what the best weapon was, and everyone had different opinions.
Nice.
And
That's a good
that's exactly
sign.
what you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we get into heated debates about like, yeah, okay, well, Shardstorm's just the worst. And it's like, oh yeah, well, have you tried this? And it's like, oh my God, I didn't know you could do that with Shardstorm. And so it's just, yeah, it's always a delight.
I think a lot of people that experiment with some of these different weapons and abilities will find some nice surprises, some nice unique takes on themselves, because you can really create some unique combinations. So Justin, let's kick it over to you, man.
All right, awesome. First of all, I love Schell Games. I Expect You to Die was one of my first maybe 5 games I bought in VR, and it was amazing. I got the Steam version of Until You Fall the day it came out, so I've been playing the game for a little while. But my question is more tuned towards the music in the game. I noticed that the first thing you hear when the very first element of the game you get is music, and it kicks in really strong and really heavy. And it's very synthwave 80s influence, it feels. But could you explain the influences a little bit more? What made you guys go with this style of music, and how did you guys magically mesh these 2 things together into one perfect vision?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I think when we were trying to figure out like, okay, well, what is the look and feel of this game? Like, again, we had the mechanics, we had an idea for like, okay, well, we want you to feel awesome. Like we had kind of like the core player fantasy pillars kind of established. Like, yes, you are a badass. You need to feel like you are getting powerful over time and stronger over time. You're not a chump becoming a hero. You are a hero becoming a god. And we want this to be feel like something that can only be done in VR, for example. And when we're talking about like, okay, well, if this is a game about hitting dudes, what music what music makes me want to get violent, I guess. Like that was kind of the first discussion, was like, okay, well, we need music that gets you amped and pushes you into the fight. And so we basically did a weird exploration of like, okay, well, there's always the straight fantasy, which is where we actually started, where it's like, yeah, this is a more straight-laced fantasy setting with like, you know, we had our kind of first versions of those weird knight and the kind of hollow characters, but it wasn't until we like kind of experimented with like, okay, well, maybe not fantasy, let's do rock and like kind of like awesome guitars and stuff like that. Well, okay, that sounds pretty cool. I pitched third wave ska because I'm an insane person, because that gets me amped up, and no one else agreed. So we moved on then from that, and we never talk about it again. But let's see, and then eventually we arrived at synthwave, and it was this kind of like, oh my god moment where we were looking at reference tracks. I think it was Mega Drive was the reference track I'd pulled, and so I hit play on that, and then there was this kind of like moment where everyone put their hands on the table, like, oh damn, I could totally see this. And so from there we looked for a lot of references, and Carpenter Brute, again I mentioned Mega Drive, like those were all like things, was like, okay, well, we want something that feels like this. And once we decided on that, once we were kind of like, okay, yeah, let's lean into this weird 80s neon soundtrack, let's make the environment and the world catch up to that. And so it was this kind of great moment of like, okay, well, the soundtrack is actually informing the look of the game, and then the look of the game then reinforces the soundtrack, where it became this awesome feedback loop of like, yes, okay, everything is just feeding off of itself. So yes, it needs to be more neon, and so then the soundtrack needs to be more like ridiculous and awesome, which then leads into the like, all right, well, now the characters need to look this way. And so we kind of ended up at this organically at this kind of awesome marriage of like fantasy, sci-fi, neon weirdness. And so again, it's like this love letters to the 80s, but without really being references to the 80s, if that makes sense. Like this isn't something where it's like, oh hey, remember that. This is more like a misremembered nostalgia of like, okay, this is kind of the emotion that you have with it, not necessarily like you having to recognize on the spot like what that thing is referencing.
It makes sense. It definitely reminds me a lot of almost in the style and like scales of chiptunes, but then it's like more synthwave. I'm a big fan of Carpenter Brute, by the way. I'm so glad you mentioned them. I love their music. Thank you, Justin, for the question. The music is like a big part of this game, big part of the atmosphere. I actually listened to the album a bunch leading up to launch on PSVR, and I loved Neon Nightmare and Unrelenting Fury. But after playing the game, it's like I just let the whole album play through now because I have like some connection to some of the other songs, and it's just so good, man.
Yeah, our art director actually refers to the genre as sword wave.
Right.
Because it's kind of like it's sort of this weird thing between synthwave and dance and its own thing. And like also like for the music itself, we tried to like, all right, well, for the Rokari, for like the Rune Knight faction, that was the synthwave side, and then the Corruption coming in is almost this weird dance club side. And so like as you get deeper in, like the genre kind of shifts and gets kind of weirder and more mishmash.
Interesting.
Yeah, it gets me so pumped up every time I get to like a new section or like the second or third area. I'm like, I'll get to the third area, I'll be like, this is my jam. Like, let's go, let's do this. But really, it brings us so much joy to hear that a game so deserving is really finding success, especially with a world that has so much potential for like expansion. Can you tell us if there's any possibility for DLC, sequel, anything else you have planned for this game?
Sure. I mean, I can't. There's no, since we're still trying to get the game out of early access. There's no official plans yet. But again, like I mentioned earlier, this is a game where we always wanted to have it be expandable, and so stuff like new weapons, new enemies, even a new environment, stuff like that are all things we've talked to death as a team. And so it's really just figuring out like, okay, well, what's next? What is the audience reaction to the game? Because I think that's the kind of the main thing is like, well, we want to get it as on many platforms as possible so that as many people can be playing it and enjoying it. And then based off of that reaction and the feedback that we're getting, that'll really help us inform what should be next and what should be added or what should be different if we went for a full sequel versus just some DLC. And again, like that was part of the best stuff from early access as well. Like we learned so much about like, oh, okay, we should add extra accessibility settings because we're getting a lot of requests from players. Oh, we're seeing that these sections of the tutorial are confusing, so let's improve that. And early access gives you that opportunity to do that. And I'm hoping that as a studio, we can kind of, even if the game's not in early access, continue to be that kind of responsive and basically willing to listen to our audience as before.
Well, we're really, really looking forward to it. And make sure everybody out there goes and joins their Discord. They've got like plenty of sections for feedback. As far as I heard, you guys might have some exciting news about your PC version.
Yeah, PC version. God, it's what, Saturday? Yeah. So in almost a couple days now, October 27th on Tuesday, the PC version will be leaving early access, and so a lot of the improvements that we've made for the Quest and PSVR versions will be making their way back to the PC. So a lot of optimizations, while still not compromising on the visuals. And yeah, we're just excited to kind of get to a point where like, okay, game's out of early access. Let's see what people think of it. Because even earlier when we were talking before this started, like people were like, oh my, wait, this game's in early access? Holy crap.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to see what folks think once the game's actually out of early access and what kind of feedback we'll get. Because I think the early access label is kind of loaded these days. And so like it's been super helpful and super great for us, but I think it's a wide range of what early access really means.
For sure. It does not feel like an early access game. It feels like a very finished, very polished game, in fact. So really excited to see, like, you know, not only it leaving early access, but, you know, anything potential coming in the future. So finally, you know, is there anything else you'd like to cover, you'd like to add regarding the game, regarding Schell Games, yourself, the team one?
No, I mean, I think you called it the Discord. So I definitely, if you're interested in the game or want to talk to people that are like experts in the game, like we've built a great community of fellow Rune Knights that have been taking the fight to Rokar and really like have been super welcoming, super like eager to help people just get better at the game. Like if you ever have questions about like, oh, how do I defeat this enemy or how do I overcome this challenge? We have lots of folks that are willing to kind of give you tips. Well,
I'm just kidding.
Oh yes, we said we just send them a Google search for Get Good. That's what it is.
Get good.
Yes, but in addition to like the folks on the Discord, we also run basically monthly challenges to kind of keep people engaged and like excited to like just experiment with the different weapons and stuff like that. So definitely check out the Discord. But yeah, I mean overall, I think just again, thanking you guys and thanking for everyone here for giving me the time to kind of just blab about the game again, because again, I just love this weird neon sword thing that we built and basically getting it into everyone's eyes and basically giving everyone a chance to check it out. Because again, like watching videos of it is one thing, but once you're actually in the headset, it's a completely different experience.
Yeah.
And I feel like I feel like a broken record when I say that, because it's like true for a lot of VR experiences, but I think especially for Until You Fall, with the avatar, with everything else that we kind of like try to do to make you feel powerful, like all the subtle details really pop once you're actually in there.
One thing we noticed making the room was how different a lot of the assets were from the PC version to the PlayStation and Quest version. And you mentioned expense and money and cost, and how challenging is it to go into your game and replace essentially whole assets and get this thing to run on other consoles?
It was very challenging. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It was a lot of work. Because yeah, like you said, like we almost rebuilt most of the assets from scratch, and then we had to do a lot of clever things to either again, like we wanted to have the same feeling and have it have its own style without feeling like, yes, it is Until You Fall, but worse. And we really just wanted to, I don't know, we tried to make it its own thing on those platforms. And so we like the effects were chunkier because we couldn't do a lot of transparency. We don't have post effects. So a lot of the stuff is now built into the textures. And so everything's neon by default rather than kind of the weird stuff we're doing with, again, post-processing. And so it was just a lot of weird, creative kind of problem solving that the team went through. Again, like the art team and the tech team are wizards and managed to pull out tiny miracles. Like my favorite example thing that again, this is the best thing. The best version of this is the stuff you don't notice. So like, for example, when you're inspecting your weapon in the PC game, it's just, yes, it's a bunch of text fields with an image on the background. We can't afford that on the Quest or the PlayStation. So what we ended up doing was taking a screenshot off screen somewhere and then printing it there because that's cheaper. And so there's a lot of like weird little kind of quirks and quirky hacks that we had to do to like get the game to look good and still run well without compromising on the gameplay.
That's interesting.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
I love that kind of creativity. That's awesome.
Right?
It almost
think outside of the box, you know?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like how when we built this room, because all of us were on different platforms. So this room is a mesh of all of those platforms. So we Felt the pain.
I probably should have asked. I think there actually already are Quest 2 enhancements and maybe some PS5 enhancements coming up, or
We have nothing official yet. Like, we already take advantage of it's just runs better on the Quest 2, obviously, because the hardware is better. In terms of specific improvements, again, we're kind of waiting to see like what the reaction is, and really what, like, because we wanted to make sure it worked on the Quest. It's like, okay, well, we now have a bunch of extra room, so it's really kind of seeing like what is the stuff we could do.
gotcha.
So we're kind of, after we get the PC version done, there's probably gonna be a little bit of a break. We're like, okay, let's see how this does, and then figure out what's next.
It does.
Yeah, I think you guys will, like I said, give it some time, let people settle in, get some the word of the game spread a little bit more by word of mouth after they play it and they go, dude, you got to play this game, because that's what happened with me. Everyone was like, AJ, you got to play this game, man, you got to play this game. Justin over there and a bunch of other people just bum rushed me, and they're like, you got to play this game, Kyle. And I played it and I absolutely love it. Now I'm gonna go tell everybody about it. So I think you guys are going to be pleased with the results over time for sure.
Oh yeah, no, we're certainly hoping for like, I think especially with the Quest 2 launch, like it's really seeming like, okay, like, yeah, this is going to be really big for all VR games. So
it is. We don't have a lot of sword fighting games, so it's in a good position to kind of take advantage of that.
I do want to say that I did love Until You Die. That was like one of my very first VR games, and I am still after my last Scorpion, so I just wanted to mention my favorites.
Yeah, our games have a lot. They're very obsessed with death, I feel like.
I love it. That was so much fun. I played that game for hours. Yes.
It's fantastic. And the way you guys continued to add content to it. I mean, you added 3 levels to I Expect You to Die post-launch of the original game.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a case of just more, again, like we're listening to community feedback and seeing that, like, okay, well, we want to make sure that people feel like they're getting their money worth. And because, again, like making VR is expensive. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, how can we kind of continue delivering on the promise of this game without, really tanking the studio?
Yeah, right.
I got you.
Well, you guys are 2 for 2 right now. We're loving what we're seeing, and we can't wait to see what you guys have next, man. Thank you to everybody for being here, and thank you to everybody watching at home. Make sure you go check out Until You Fall. It is awesome. And there are more episodes of the VR Chat Show to look forward to, so make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for more. Thank you guys so much, man. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Woohoo!
Bye.
Bye. Woohoo!
Go play Until You Fall.
Yes.